Hi everyone, today I'll be talking about Salesforce Functions. So before we get started with Salesforce Functions, we need to install the following software. We will need a Docker desktop. We need to create a new developer sandbox. We will need VS Code, Salesforce CLI, and Node.js. After we have installed the mentioned software, we can go ahead and create a new project in VS Code. After we have created a new project, we need to authorize our developer sandbox as a dev hub. And thereafter, we can create a new scratch org for testing our function. After we have created the scratch org, we can create our function using the following command: sfgenerate function name and language of our choice. Thereafter, a new function folder will be created under the functions directory. So let's get started and create our new Salesforce function. As I have mentioned, once you run the command to create your function, a new folder will get created for your function under the functions directory. So in our case, we have created a function called create accounts, and you can find it here under the functions directory. Once you create your function, you need to go to terminal and you need to go to your create accounts directory and run the command sf run function start container in order to create a new Docker image of your function. Once this command is executed, a new Docker image will be created in your Docker and it will be running on the port 8080. So the Docker image is nothing but an executable of our function. And once our function is created, you will see that you will have a scaffold over here, which will contain some very important files. So first of all, we have the project file, which is nothing but the metadata that represents our function. Then we have the payload.json file. Now this file has to be manually created under your create accounts folder. And this will basically act as the request body, which will be used to invoke our function. And thereafter, we also have the index.js file, which will act as the entry point to our function, which means that whenever our function is invoked, this will be the first file that will be called. So we need to add all our function-based logic inside our index.js file. Once your function is up and running, you will see in your terminal that there is a mention that your function is running on the port 8080. This means that now you can invoke your function. So before invoking our function, let me explain to you what we are trying to do here. Using this function, we will create a few dummy accounts in our Salesforce org. So let me explain the function logic to you. So this is a very simple function which contains 3 parameters. Now you'll see that these 3 parameters are very important. Firstly, events represents the data which is in our payload. So as I have mentioned before, we are using the payload to invoke our function. And we'll be sending some important parameters through our payload, which will be sent into our function. And in turn, our function will use the parameters to give us some desired results. In our case, we'll be using it to create the account. So from our payload, we'll be passing an account name, and we'll be sending that account name through the event parameter, and we'll be using that account name to basically create a new dummy account in our org. After we have fetched the account name from the payload over here in this line, thereafter we will create a new object of our account. Here we need to specify the type of this object and the field name. Once that is done, we will use this promise method in order to create the account. Now over here, you'll see that this is the second parameter in our function. Now this context parameter is basically the connection between our org and the Salesforce function. So this acts as a junction. And this context parameter will call the data API class, which will call the create method. And by calling the create method, we can insert the account record into Salesforce. So let's see a small demo. Over here, we will add any random name, let's say test account 5, and we will save this and we will click on the invoke button to invoke our function. Now, once this is done, you will see that a new account has been created. So now go to Salesforce. Let's open our Scratch org here and refresh the account list view. As you can see, a new test account 5 record has been created using the Salesforce function. Now, last but not the least, if you see the function over here, you'll see that the last parameter is logger. Now, as you can see, logger is a function which is used to handle any kind of logs in order to trace what is going on in your function. Now, this is a very important parameter because it can be used to trace out any kind of error that is occurring in your function. And whatever line or whatever error you log using the logger.info method, you can see that here in the terminal. So now we can go ahead and create our next function, which will be used to query the number of accounts from our Salesforce org. So you can go ahead and press Command Shift P, and you can click on create function, and you can give the name read accounts and click on enter. So I've already created the function, so I'll skip that step, but you can go ahead and create your function. Once you create it, you'll see that under your project scaffold, a new folder has been created called read accounts, and it will contain all of these files apart from the payload.json file. So you need to create this manually, and you need to add this JSON in there. And here we'll just pass the account name like we did before. If you open the index.js file, you'll see that there is some auto-generated code. So you can remove those lines of code, and you can pause the video and copy this code sample from here. So basically, what we are doing here is we are using the query method to fetch the accounts based on the account name, and we're passing the account name from our payload, right? So after we receive the results, we'll just log the results in our terminal, and we'll return the results in our output panel. Okay. So let's go ahead and start our function. So again, click on Command Shift P, and we'll then click on Start Function in Container. Now, if you go to your Docker desktop, you'll see that a new Docker image has been created for read accounts, and it is running. So you can go ahead and invoke your function from your payload. So we can just click on the invoke button here. And as you can see, the records are returned from our org. We have a total of 6 accounts, and all of them have the test keyword in their name. So they're all returned over here in our output panel. Our next function will be used to update the accounts present in our org, and you can go ahead and create a new function called update accounts. I've already created the function, and in here you can pause the video and copy this code sample over here. Okay, so once you're done copying the code, let me explain it to you. So over here, what we're doing is we're basically passing two parameters from our payload. First is the description and second is the account name. Okay, so what we're going to try to do with this function is we'll try to update the description of our account. So in this function, we will store the description and the account name from our payload in these two variables first. Then we will use the context promise and we will use the query method in order to query our account. And from there, we'll use the response variable in here and we will get the ID from our record, which we queried over here. And once we have the record ID, we will go ahead and create a new account object. And in here, we will add three fields. We'll add the account name, which we are passing through the payload. We will add the record ID, which we have fetched from the query. And we will add some description, which we are passing from the payload again. After we have created the object, we will use the update method and we will pass the account variable inside the update method to get the result. And we'll show the result in our output panel. So let's get started and let's run this function. So let's press Ctrl+Shift+P and let's click on Start Function in Container. All right, so now that our Docker image has been created, you'll see that it is running. So we can start with our update account function. Just for demo purpose, I've added a lot of loggers in here so that I can show you the logs which are captured in our terminal. We can enter some account name over here like test account 5 and we can write hello world in the description. And if you look over here, right now description is empty for the test account 5 record. So now let's invoke our function and see if it updates the description of the account. Okay, as you can see, the account has been updated now. And if you check the terminal, right, you'll see that there are a lot of logs in here inside the output panel, such as account name, response, and all of these things. And now, if you go to the account and if you refresh the account, let's check the description. So here you can see that the description of the account has been updated. So now we can finally create our last function. This function will be called delete accounts and it will be responsible for deleting an account record. So you can go ahead and create the delete account function. I've already created it here. And in my payload, I have added one parameter called account name. And in my init.js file, I have already added my code. You can pause the video and copy the code. So once you're done, let me explain to you what I'm doing here. So first of all, from my payload.json, I am passing the account name and I am storing it in this variable. Then I'm using the query method and I am placing the account name in my query to fetch the account record. Once I've fetched the record in my response variable, I'm getting the ID of the record. And then I'm using the delete method. And in here, I am using two parameters. The first parameter is the S object, whose record I want to delete. So in our case, it is account. And the second parameter is the record ID. So once this promise is executed, we will return the result. So I've already started the function in our Docker container. If I open my Docker, you'll see that it is up and running. So now I can go ahead and invoke my function from the payload. So in here, I have added test account 4. So this is the account I want to delete, right? So I'll click on invoke. Okay, and now my function has executed successfully. So if I open my account list view, and my test account 4 record should get deleted if I refresh the page. So as you can see, the record has been deleted. Lastly, I would like to show a few URLs which I found to be very useful while I was learning about Salesforce Functions, especially the first URL, which is the GitHub repository. You can look into it, and it contains a lot of useful examples about Salesforce Functions, and I found that to be quite learnable. And if you have any queries about Salesforce Functions, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section. I'll also be adding the URLs in the description box. Thank you so much for attending.